Okay, so hi everybody. Good afternoon. Happy Thursday. My name is Meg. I am here as part of the Power to Fly's virtual host team, and I am super excited to start chatting with you all and introduce our speaker, Kelly, and start getting to your questions. As we get started today, I do have a couple quick housekeeping items for you. I'm going to try and go through this quickly so we can maximize time with Kelly. If you've joined one of our sessions before, you'll know a couple things. This is all about audience participation. So whether you submitted questions prior to today's session or whether you have questions that come up during this discussion we're going to have today, please feel free to participate. You are more than welcome and highly encouraged to turn your cameras on if you'd like, come off mute. And if you do come off mute, whether your cameras are on or off, you will show up in the recording of today's session. Now, we're live streaming this to our website and we're recording it to post on our YouTube channel. I highly suggest you follow us there. And subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss any upcoming chat and learns or office hours. But as we're doing so, if you want to make sure that you don't come up on our recording at all, that's not a problem. You are still highly encouraged to participate by typing your questions or comments into the Zoom group chat. If you do come off mute to ask a question or comment, I just ask that you try not to interrupt anybody. I am fair game because I get paid to fill the silence, but try not to interrupt Kelly or any of our other attendees. Just use your best judgment. And make sure that you go back on mute as soon as you're done actively speaking. You'll see me go off and on mute a lot during today's session. That's so nobody has to listen to the bulldogs snoring under my desk. If I do mute you, it's not a rebuke. You are still more than welcome to come off mute and ask questions. I've just done so to maintain audio clarity for everybody on today's chat, as well as the recording for everybody if they want to watch it later. Like I said, we are recording today, and anybody that registered for today's session, whether you spend 5 minutes with us, stay for the whole 30, or you weren't able to make it and you're watching this later, hi. Everybody that gets that registers for these sessions automatically gets sent a rewatch email with a link to rewatch the recording. That happens in like 1 to 2 business days, and the recordings live on our website and on our YouTube channel in perpetuity. And as always, it is always free to watch these recordings. You can also share them with other people if you'd like, especially if Kelly, comes up with some amazing gem that you want to make sure that your sister hears, or your coworker, or your mom, or whatever. You are more than welcome to send it around. While we're going on with today's session, please feel free to take pictures or video if you'd like, and share that you are chatting and learning with Power to Fly today. You feel free to tag us. We are at Power to Fly on all social media: LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And then we also use the hashtag Power to Fly if you'd like. We love to spread the love and see where all of our audience is coming from. So while we're doing that, I will get us started with a question that was pre-submitted. Again, if you did pre-submit a question and you're unsure if we're going to ask it, the best way to make sure that you get your question asked and answered is to come off mute or put it in the Zoom chat so that we can I can raise that to Kelly. So Kelly, while I am getting the questions loaded up, do you want to give a quick intro about yourself to our attendees and explain why you're here to talk to us about these negative feedback situations and how to handle them?
Sure. Thank you, Meg. Happy to be here today. My name is Kelly Kaplan. I'm currently working at Salesforce as a director in engineering. I've been in management and engineering now for about 10 years. Before that was an engineer myself. And this topic, I think it's one that, especially for new managers, it's a very fearful thing. It's something people dread a lot. And so I just thought it might be good to talk about it in a different way and talk about ways to approach it as a very positive thing. And I always tell people feedback is a gift. It is really a gift. And if you think of it that way, there's not really, I actually don't like to use the word negative feedback, but it's a catchy title. And I think it's what people think about. But I think a lot of it is just changing your mindset about what your responsibility is as a manager, and that this is a really important part of it. And you're giving somebody a gift, a perspective they don't necessarily see. And it's your job to help them accept that feedback and grow from it and improve. So that's just a couple of my thoughts, and there's different things that you can do to set yourself up for success with that. And I'm sure it's going to come up in some of the questions and answers.
Absolutely, and I love that idea that negative feedback is kind of catchy, but it should always be seen as constructive criticism or constructive feedback, because if somebody, you're right, it does show that people care about you and your journey and your, how you're learning and how you work within that microcosm. So yeah, let's get started with today's questions. So this first person had asked, what's your best advice for dealing with really emotional people when giving constructive feedback? And I feel like this can be both kind of addressed from the position of someone giving that feedback as well as somebody receiving that feedback. I know that I sometimes have very emotional reactions, even though I might not feel that strongly about what's being said. Tears well up and I can't stop it. So let's just keep going.
It's a great question. I think of two things when I saw this question. I think anytime when you're in that situation, you're going to give this feedback, if you know that person is emotional because you've had this experience with them before, I think you really pay attention to their body language and see if they're going to have that kind of reaction. And you set it up from the get-go of telling them that you're going to share this with them and it's okay, you can process it and digest it, and we can come back tomorrow and do follow-up. So you share the feedback, and if you can see they're really struggling with it, they're emotional, they'll probably be able to get it, but at that moment, they're not ready to really take the next step, then you set that up that way, right? I'm gonna share this with you. I want you to take time and think about it. I want you to digest it, process it. Let's come back tomorrow or the next day, and then we'll work together on where do we go from here. Don't force it in that moment. Some people really need that time to process it. And I've found that works well. I think the other thing that helps people too is if you can show vulnerabilities, if you're empathetic, and if you yourself, like you said, have struggled with it, share that. People love to hear that. Hey, you know what? I myself have struggled at times with taking constructive feedback. This is how I've handled it. It's okay. I know this is difficult. But again, reminding them that you're giving them this so that you can work with them to improve. It's you need to convince them that they can trust you and that you have your best interests at heart at the end of the day when you're giving feedback, and then you can move forward together. So maybe just giving that emotional person time to process on their own and come back in a better state of mind.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably also a very good idea to keep in mind, if not just with emotional people, but maybe if you see someone taking in this feedback and maybe not really absorbing it, kind of shutting down and not actually hearing what you're saying. Because you don't want to waste your time, but you also don't want to waste their time continuing to, kind of keep going along your list if all they heard was first negative thing and then like everything kind of shuts down.
Yeah. Another thing, you can also always start with the positives, right? Before you're leading into that, and talk about the things that they are doing really well. And maybe that helps give them a little bit more boost to go into the areas that need more focus.
That is also good advice. Yeah. I think in past situations when I've received negative feedback, it's sort of almost been sandwiched. So it'll be like something positive, something not necessarily negative, but like something to work on. And then sometimes it'll follow up with either something positive or, I think that you'll be able to make these changes because here's the things I've seen you do in the past, or I'm confident that we can work together to find a middle ground on this because we compromised on this thing earlier.
Yeah.
So Carol is asking if you could address some of these answers to giving feedback to colleagues as well as employees. Do you have anything to say before we maybe tackle something like that? I know there's a couple questions that would kind of fit very nicely into what Carol's asking.
Yeah, I think it's all very different, right? Your role giving your employee feedback is very different than you giving your manager. I saw one of the questions about, can I apply this to giving feedback to my manager? Very different dynamic, and same with your peers, right? So I think the commonality though is you have to build trust with people. If you don't build a relationship and connect with them, the feedback isn't, I don't think you can maximize what you can get from the feedback or giving the feedback if you don't first build a solid relationship with somebody. So that's true in all of these cases. But when I looked at the question about giving negative feedback to your manager, I think the statement was something about, if their management style doesn't match, what do you do? And I think for your manager, and I've had to do this, I'm sure we all have, you need to focus on saying very specifically what you need, not what they might be doing in your view wrong. It's probably not going to help you, but really think about what is it that they're doing that isn't working for you, and be very specific about what you need. And you offer it to them. Say, hey, you know what? I feel like I need X for me to be successful. Can you help me? Let's talk about it. And not be set on exactly what you want them to do, but tell them what you need and work together to figure out how to get there together. Because there's things that you don't know, right? Maybe you want more one-on-ones, but you know, their calendar is packed. There's reasons why they can't meet. So to talk about other ways you can async, communicate. And that's a nice collaborative way for you to show leadership skills too, to bring this up, to say, let's work on this. What do you think about X, Y, Z? But that's different than the person you're giving feedback to that reports to you, where you're responsible for their performance. You're actually not responsible for your manager's performance, but you do need to get from them what you need to be successful. So I think the focus is different.
So could you talk a little bit about that trust? Because I'm thinking in terms of building trust, you kind of do really need time. It's not really something you can do immediately.
Yeah,
but outside of the time spent with someone, I mean, do you need to establish trust based on actions, trust based on your response to receiving, you know, constructive or negative feedback yourself? How exactly can you build that trust, whether it's with a manager or an employee?
Or a peer? Yeah, it doesn't come easy. It doesn't happen on its own. And you're right, it takes time. And that's challenging when you go into a new role, new job, because you don't have it from the get-go. So I think one-on-one with people for your reports, I think it's really important as a manager that you commit to one-on-ones. You don't let them, you know, those aren't the first things that should go from your calendar. So you really set aside time to connect with your people and start to build that relationship in all directions, one-on-ones with your manager, peers, and reports. So you take the one-on-ones very seriously and you maximize that time to get to know them as a person. It's not a status meeting, right? You're checking in, how are you doing? You're really being interested in their well-being, you know, and you have to demonstrate that. And I think committing to the one-on-ones is one of the ways you're demonstrating I care about you and I'm setting this time aside. So I think secondly, though, you have to show that you are a trusted leader, and they're going to see that over time. They're going to see you in meetings. They're going to see you making decisions, supporting the team. So over time, if you're being a good leader and a good manager, they're going to see that in your everyday behavior and your decision making and thinking, does she take a lot of points of view in, right? Is she listening to people? Is she making sound decisions based on data? And when you see people do that, you build trust.
All right, so that transparency with your maybe your direct reports or with your manager about like, here's kind of what's going on globally for your position, especially if you report to multiple people, that can be very helpful. I want to make sure before we end for today, because we only have 15 minutes left, it always goes like at warp speed and feels like we've just started talking. But I want to make sure we touch on how to kind of elicit that negative or constructive feedback from people, because especially I feel like sometimes maybe people don't feel confident in delivering it or don't feel like it's their place or something like that. But before we get to that, as far as it comes to giving feedback to colleagues, my mind when I read this question immediately went to kind of like peer review sessions or something that's scheduled. In those contexts, obviously, it's a little bit easier to give feedback to colleagues, but what do you do if you feel that feedback is needed for a colleague, but it's A, not solicited by the colleague, and B, not part of like a structured peer review setting?
I have had that situation happen, and I'll probably raise it to my boss first to get their input on how this could be communicated over to that person. And it depends on situation and people, but what I have had happen is after those conversations is either I or my boss would talk to that person's boss and just provide feedback. And there's these concerns. Maybe you want to do a 360 on your person. 360 feedbacks are so valuable for everybody. And so I have suggested that to people, like maybe you want to do a 360, maybe it's just me, you know, I don't know, I'm just sharing my perspective, but I'm seeing these behaviors. If you haven't seen it, throw a 360 out to who this person is working with on a daily basis and is in meetings with. Because a lot of times as a manager too, you're blind to a lot of things, right? So again, it's very valuable when someone comes to me and raises something about one of my people. And then I will zoom in and see what's going on. But I'm glad you brought up, because 360s, if you don't do those, you've got a very narrow view of a person's behavior and performance. So if you can convince that other person themselves or their manager to do a 360, it'd probably be very enlightening.
Excellent. On a personal note, I know that I've had very good success, especially when there wasn't really a hierarchy to raise these things to. In situations where I've had a personal relationship with this other colleague, I've had a good results with waiting until kind of something brought this issue to the forefront, like some like organic situation at work kind of raised it, and then just asking, like, I know I saw that this didn't go very well, or you don't seem really happy with this result. Would you mind if I gave you some advice or gave you my perspective on the situation? And that way, if they say yes, you can, and you can proceed and kind of gauge how they're taking it as you go. But that also gives them the option of saying, well, no, I don't really want it. That way you're not wasting your time. You're not potentially burning a bridge or creating a rift between you and your colleague. Now, granted, I do think your idea of following that sort of chain of command or, using those intermediaries is a lot smarter, but I do know that, sometimes, especially remote, there might not always be the option to do that.
Well, I think one is always best if you've got enough of a trust relationship that you can approach them and even ask that question. Always best.
Absolutely. Okay, so this other person had asked a question about how do you foster a growth mindset, specifically with young people who are early in their careers and are on that learning journey?
I think, great question. These are all such great questions. I think role modeling is best for that kind of thing. And going back to one of the earlier things I said about showing your own vulnerabilities, right? So if you want people to be open and take feedback and grow and be willing to try new things, you're in the perfect position to demo that for them, and being very honest where you've made mistakes and what you've learned. I think also cultivating within your team a learning culture, right? And being very supportive about trainings, not only of the technical skills, but also the soft people skills, which is typically, not to stereotype engineers, and one of them I can say it, is not always our strong suit. So supporting the team in doing those kinds of trainings and improvements, but I think you have to show the team that that's what you do and that's how you improve, and that you are supportive of them doing the same.
Absolutely. And as someone who has gone through a lot of different jobs and different professions in my working career, I've been on this receiving end a lot. One thing that always helped me was not only getting the criticism or the feedback saying, like, here's the mistake that was made, or here's where you need to improve, but also hearing, at least when it was accurate, yes, you're in a learning phase. Yes, these are mistakes we kind of expect you to make. You're on this trajectory that's understandable. Like, yes, you're making these errors, but this is how we learn. This is how, other people have come before you and followed this same path, or followed that same trail that wasn't exactly where you should go. Or I understand the thinking behind why you did this, but here's what the correction is, and it's okay because
it's within the norm. Yeah, but you're right, saying it's okay. And here's how I'm going to help you. That's how we're going to work together. What do you want to do to move forward, and come up with an action plan together.
Yeah, consequences are what they will be depending on the situation, but it's that attitude you take towards the mistake, the correction, and then going on that really, for me at least, have really highlighted when I've had good managers versus managers.
That's a really good point, Meg.
Okay, so this other person had a different, kind of flip side of this. How can you provide this feedback to someone who has more industry experience than you, but you are in charge of?
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to interpret it because I don't know exactly what the person intended by that. Again, thinking about this from an engineering perspective, more industry experience, I'm thinking the person is a stronger, maybe engineer technically, the technical skills. So I'm going to assume they mean by that. But you're in charge means someone has chosen you to lead this team, this person and this team. And you have to remind yourself you were asked to lead for a reason, right? And you have those skills that are so important. It means you're a multiplier. You know how to work with these people and continue to grow them. Even though maybe they've got 10 more years in the tech industry, you have something that somebody saw. And I think you just have to remind yourself of that and be confident in that, right? And maybe you're not going to help them with the technical skills. God knows I don't do that anymore. And I just walked into this job a year ago, right? And so I'm very senior people on this team from a technical point of view. But you have to just remember your strength is leadership. And it's your job to give them feedback and grow.
Absolutely. I mean, it's very important to remember those things. I think personally, I struggle with figuring out kind of how to word these things. And I feel like a lot of people do. And what's been helpful to me, not just in this area, but in a lot of areas, is instead of trying to figure out the wording that would gently, get someone to understand, like, where I'm coming from on something or whatever, has been to sort of acknowledge the awkwardness or acknowledge the power imbalance or acknowledge whatever, and just say, speak out loud what you want, what platform you want to start from. I know that you have way more experience than I do at this. I'm not trying to criticize your knowledge. I don't want you to think that I'm criticizing that or assuming that I know more. What I do want to talk about is this area. Or I don't want you to be reactionary and upset about this because I think this is something we can get through and I want to help you learn how to do this better. Here's what I'm seeing. Calling out what you want to be heard or what you want to avoid. No, it's not the most graceful way to do it, but it is the most clear. And it does help everybody start, like you said, on that even footing of trust. So that way there's room for misunderstanding without completely derailing the process.
Yeah.
I've been in this seat a lot, actually.
Yeah, it's great advice, Meg.
Thank you. Okay, so this person wanted to know, think back to the very first time you had to give a negative review as a new manager. What is the most important thing you wish you had known when you were in that place?
I think a couple of things came to mind. I wish let's see, what do I say? I should have gave feedback sooner. I did. I dreaded it, right? As a new manager, and I'd wait too long. And I made it so much worse in my head than what it really was. And so it made that way more stressful, and it wasn't as valuable waiting too long. So giving the feedback timely is so important. And so that's a key takeaway for new managers, timely. And I do wish I would have thought of it in a more positive way about feedback being a gift and not being negative. But I really had it in my head that way, and it affected how I approached it with the person, and it caused me to delay, and that wasn't valuable for either one of us. And the other things I learned to do better over time was really setting clear expectations with your new employees if you're doing a new team, and over time. It's really important to stop and set those expectations, make sure you're on the same page, and then just have an ongoing conversation about feedback aligned on what that baseline is of what's expected and where they are. And you can do that with self-assessments, and you're doing assessment against job descriptions and we're aligned and these are the target areas. Now we know what our conversation is going to be, and the feedback is just this constant cadence as opposed to this big negative moment that you put off and dread for 2 months or something. So just a mind shift around how you approach it.
Excellent. So we have 5 minutes to go. I want to make sure that we know, that all of our attendees know that the floor is open. If you have any questions that you would like to raise, any comments that you have on anything that Kelly has said so far, please feel free to jump in and participate if you would like to. One of the questions I wanted to make sure we get to, what are some of the ways that we're taught to provide negative feedback that are terrible or don't work? Some of the tried and true, allegedly, things that either get passed down by habit or by rote, or because that's what they taught me in business school or whatever.
I didn't go to business school, so I don't feel like I was ever really taught something. But I think where I've gotten feedback that I thought wasn't delivered well, or I can imagine would not be taken well if I'm doing it in this way, is remembering that, again, it's just your perspective. So when you provide the feedback, you need to provide it You need to be very clear what it is, the situation, your behavior, this is the impact, and then pause and let the person respond and give their reaction to that and their perspective. Don't assume that we know everything. And they may bring something to light that you weren't aware of. And so I think always, it's not a one-way thing. I mean, you've got a pretty strong, it's very important what you have to say to them, but you need to be open and let them contribute back to the conversation, have a conversation around it, and then together, figure out how to go forward. But I think if it comes in and it's just a direct, here's the feedback, don't ask for their reaction, and don't talk about the next steps, then it's not that useful, right? So here it is, respond, and now let's work together on where we go. And if you leave out those other two, it's going to be less effective, I think. The person's going to be less willing to take that feedback, do something with it, and move on their own.
Sure. Just as a personal curiosity here, since obviously everybody listening in with, the slant of this whole section has been how to effectively provide that feedback. But knowing that no man is really an island and that very, very few of us will exist in a position where we never will again have to take on or receive this feedback, what are some things that we can do to be effective recipients and kind of help build that trust? The first thing that came to mind to me is it okay as the recipient to say that you need time to digest something if it's not offered? Or is there a better way to go about that? Or there's certain things that you can do as a recipient to show that you are actually absorbing this feedback, you take it seriously, you will weigh what they're saying, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fine to say I need. And I think even maybe being self-aware that you're having an emotional reaction and that you really should think about it. And you're going to probably have that if it's a blind spot, right? It's something brand new you didn't realize, and we're human, we probably are going to have an emotional reaction there. It would be best if you can if your boss doesn't recognize it, to tell you to take that time, think about it, don't have an immediate response back. And maybe you just need a little time to sit there and process it in the room. Maybe you need to wait a day. So coming in with that open mind that you're going to learn something that you didn't know before. And that nugget could be so key for your career and your growth. This person's pointing something out that you may not have known. That's not a bad thing. Again, that's awesome. I mean, that is a gift, right? Because it's probably not just that one person. If you're not aware of it and it's a problem, it's having an impact, how would you ever change it? And if you don't change it, how are you going to progress in your career? So if you can talk to yourself beforehand, reminding yourself it's a gift, it's positive, this is great that you're getting this information, and you'll have something to work on together, you'll be so much more open for that feedback. And even so, it's so bad, it's so new, you can't take it, take a day and come back the next day and see if you're ready to process it and move on.
Absolutely. All right, well, it is 2:00, so we do have to round up for today. I just want to highlight for everybody that I have shared some links where you can connect with Kelly Lamore, who is the head of our mentorship program here at Power to Fly, has also shared her LinkedIn information if you'd like to connect with her as well. And just as we kind of round out, Carol had also commented that you should definitely make sure you give feedback so that not everyone in the office can hear it. That privacy and not kind of putting that on display for people. I think sometimes it's done inadvertently, sometimes as a show of force of like, look at me taking charge of the situation. But absolutely seems like a factor of that trust, Kelly, that you had discussed early on.
Yeah, definitely, Carol. One-on-one for that kind of feedback.
Yeah. Well, Kelly, it's been a wonderful half hour. I just want to say thank you so much for spending time with us and our community and sharing your expertise with us. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with before we adjourn for today?
No, it was very fun. Thank you, Meg, for facilitating. And I learned, as always, learning. Picked up some good stuff here myself. So thank you.
Thank you for coming and sharing the time with us. And again, thank you to all of our attendees for spending time with us as well. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions beforehand, everyone that submitted questions and commented during today's session. It was invaluable. Again, you'll all be receiving the rewatch email with a link to watch this recording in the next 1 to 2 business days. If you have questions, you can always reach out to hi@powertofly.com. And I've also put a link in there into the chat where you can check out some of our upcoming virtual events. We have a lot of stuff going on this week and next. So please check out those links, and I hope that I'll see many more of you around soon. So have a great afternoon, and happy Thursday. Bye.